Hello, thank you for tuning in to today's Back to the City. I'm Simon Calder, and today I'm joined by Dan from Bitter Ghost. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. We're going to talk about the first of two EPs that are being released this year. This one's out this month. It's called Neophyte, which means a person who is new to a subject, skill, or belief. You and the other two members of Bitter Ghost are not new to the Twin Cities music scene.
No.
Who are the other members, and what are your backgrounds?
Our drummer's name is Justin, and our bass player's name is Mark, and we're just a three-piece. Both of those guys have been around like me for a bit, and Justin used to play in a band called the name is escaping me now. Mark used to play in a band called Frontier. Oh, Justin was in a band called Liquid Sun.
Oh, yeah.
And they both play in a project together called My Loving Tiger. And I don't know, I put an ad out in the old Craigslist, and you never know what you're going to find. And fortunately, I found these guys, and yeah, they've had a ton of experience, and we can kind of all speak on the same level and wavelength and stuff, and I'll have pretty similar experiences and backgrounds and stuff. So
you're not neophytes, but no. the record is addressing or saying something about the neophytes.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, just that no matter, obviously we're musicians of a certain age at this point, and that just any time that you get in a room in a collaborative situation with other musicians, it's always new. It's always it's like starting all over again, like you were 14 and trying to figure out how to make everybody's personality work and what everybody's goals are and who contributes what, and so it's
to some extent then whenever people meet in the present and collaborate, then then the situation is new. There's a newness to it. So there's not a critique then of the neophyte? Why is the record called Neophyte?
Well, because it's a lot of these songs were written around the time when I moved away from Minnesota. I was 20, I was here 25 years, moved out to Denver, and again, just being 30-something and being new to something, just being... I don't know where to go to get groceries, or and now I have to try to figure out if I want to play in a band. How do I go about doing that?
Who am I in this new context?
Who am I in this new context? So, and it just feels like that's been something throughout my life, because I haven't moved around a ton, but I've moved around enough where it's always felt like, I've moved from Virginia to here and having to figure out who I am in this context, and so that's kind of just constantly feeling like I'm having to start over and be the new guy in a situation.
Which perhaps is a good feeling if it's true that that we're often, it's misleading to assume that the framework that we have to make sense of things is entirely applicable in a situation. We find ourselves to be neophytes more regularly than we expect. And so maybe it's a good thing to feel that one is.
And to embrace it, really. A lot of people don't like new and change, and it sometimes seems like, especially when people move somewhere, they kind of approach it like, hey, look, aren't you so glad that I'm here? As opposed to really embracing what's around you and letting
how can I transform in this context?
And letting it transform you and your ideology or whatever it may be. So.
Or your values.
Or your values.
Value is a word that comes up in every single song. In this EP. Read the Signs, the first track, has a reference to compromising your values. In Station Keys, Past Regrets and Devaluing. And then in Poles, Lockstep in Misvaluing. So we have devaluing, misvaluing, and compromised values.
Yeah.
Was that a conscious thing?
You know, when I wrote it, when I typed these out and I sent them to you, I just was like, man, this is a common theme that I seem to be, well, a little bit of the misvaluing and devaluing, things like that is sort of, I kind of like malaprops, you know, and so that's a little bit why I put devalue and misvalue, you know. But yeah, I'm always thinking about how people define themselves through their values and how they can constantly shift. Yet
The values shift.
Yeah, but yet they present themselves in a way to the outside world. And sometimes those values don't necessarily jive with each other, you know.
Is that due to a lack of self-reflection and like pushing towards integrity and coherence, or is that a good thing?
Well, I think it goes back to sort of my being raised around religion and things like that, and always struggling with how much of this really reflects who you are, or how much of this is what you're being told to do, you know.
Something you've inherited, like an ideology that has been swallowed up, and might be at odds with other aspects of the person in a way that isn't maybe recognized.
Yeah, and that goes for me too, because as much as some of this, some of the stuff that I write is definitely out, you know, is addressing some things. It's also self-reflective too. So I don't make it sound like I'm just, you know, trying to rip on any groups in particular or anything, but you know, because it's as taking it in upon myself and going, how am I consistent, or how am I inconsistent on things, you know?
Yeah, there seems to be a kind of call for integrity and a preference, obviously, for integrity above hypocrisy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And a calling out of hypocrisy.
Right.
It's throughout all three of the songs.
Yeah.
Is that something that will follow through into the other three songs in the kind of partner EP?
Yeah, I mean, those are always themes in everything I write is just trying to figure out where people's heads are at when in the case of like integrity or hypocrisy or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, the songs are kind of, they went from being new to a place like Denver and then moving back here to a place that I knew so much about, but now being the new guy back in a place that I already knew in the old place, and having to restart and get used to the flow of things here. And yeah, and so that's the kind of the second EP is familiarity, but yeah, still feeling like, oh, here we go again.
Like a return.
Yeah.
And adapting to this place that one knows and yet does not know.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a virtue to flexibility and openness. There's a virtue to allowing oneself to just being comfortable with being seen as the neophyte, being comfortable with being seen as someone who isn't expecting a place to adapt to them, but who is adaptable. There's a virtue to that. But there's also a virtue to internally being really grounded in one's values and not being a hypocrite.
Yeah.
How does the record explore how the relationship between those two things?
I think there's probably a lot of. I think it explores it in some ways in a humorous tone. I think it explores it in. There was some really hard times when we were out there, so there is some melancholy to it.
Yeah, when you were out in Denver.
Yeah,
yeah,
and even coming back here, which wasn't exactly something we were prepared to do. And so, yeah, it's a lot of self-reflection. It's, you know, yeah, there's some times in there in the songs where, you know, I have to address mistakes that I made and, you know, how it affects the people around you. And, yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, Station Keys again refers to past regrets and devaluing. What is being devalued?
The past regret. What is the line again?
Station Keys begins, the consummation of recycled things, past regrets and devaluing, outwitted as with your syllabus.
Oh, okay. Well, the past regrets and devaluing part is really a lot of is trying to figure out if you made the right decisions and if you maybe compromised yourself in some of those decisions and maybe some of the things you said in those decisions or when you made those decisions. So yeah,
I love that. So there's this, as present in the record as the calling others out for their hypocrisy, there is this other component where there's a questioning of oneself. Have I compromised myself?
Yeah.
Have I failed in this instance to live up to the values that I would present as my core values?
Yeah. So you can almost go, I could go line by line and go, well, now I'm pointing the finger this way, and now I'm pointing the finger that way. And now I'm pointing the finger this way, you know.
Okay, but you're consistently recognizing when there isn't a living up to values.
Yeah.
And so much so that that all three of the songs refer to values. Why? I mean, what could be more? I value values too. What could be more important than than value? The question of value. But how did that end up being so central in the record?
It was because just having a wife and kids and how you're gonna help them navigate through the world. And them having the same sort of struggles and questioning themselves and what you've taught them and so I think that I was, you know, we went out there with our oldest daughter and then we had another girl when we were out there, and so it was just all of that stuff was in my head at the same time. Just, you know, what is meaningful, because we left a bunch of family here, and that was really hard on our oldest. And so, you know, what matters, you know, your happiness or her happiness, you know.
And how do we balance these two? Or more than two.
Yeah. Between maybe your spouse and maybe one of your kids.
Yep, and then all of the people that one cares about and is connected to outside of one's family unit too.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's. And what is it then about the medium of music and music, like driving fast, heavy music that sounds like this? What is it that makes that a particularly fruitful medium through which to explore these issues?
Because what I've been.
You just have to.
Yeah, I just have to. It's just what I'm drawn to. I've tried to play quiet, and I just don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it and still really be myself.
Yeah. So being oneself is what we've been talking about too.
Yeah.
Like one is oneself when there is integrity, when one is in alignment with one's values, when you're not compromising.
Yeah.
So you're not compromising. You're being yourself, making
Right.
music that sounds like this.
Right.
This is the kind of music that would the music sound any different if you hadn't had those experiences and weren't exploring these kinds of questions?
Probably, yeah, it would probably feel a little bit different. I mean, for me, music has always been, well, not always, but it's probably pretty recently has been mostly about just trying to find what my voice is. And, you want it to be unique, you want it to be your own.
Yeah. So do we mean like in terms of like vocal delivery, or that, and more metaphorically, like what's the voice of the band?
Right, more metaphorically, yeah, yeah, and vocally.
But it's a part of it.
It is a part of it, yes. There's a certain aesthetic that we go for that, yeah, we're probably not for everybody, but I can't imagine the band that I'm playing in to sound any different, especially if I'm writing the music or the songs for it.
Yeah.
So,
how does the songwriting process work in this band?
well, that's been it's been mostly me bringing the foundations, and then we'll kind of do some arranging in the practices or whatnot, and then we'll practice them when we figure them out. And then Justin and Mark do all of the production. So give it to Justin and Mark. We, record our drums, bass, guitars, do the vocals. And I always tell the story that whatever goes in is not necessarily what is going to come out, because Justin and Mark sometimes will hear something when they're mixing or when they're doing some of the bounces and stuff, and they'll put a pause in here, or they'll extend parts or something like that. And so,
are there specific moments in any of these 3 songs where that happens?
No, I don't. I think these are pretty much straight ahead.
Well, maybe we have to wait for the second EP.
Yeah,
for all of those treats.
The first EP, there was a song on there called "Folksy" that was really. It went in one way, and when it came out, it was pretty much. I mean, it was relatively the same, but it was still kind of like. What happened to this?
And then you have to relearn it.
And then we have to relearn it. Yeah. So
you and neophytes.
Yeah, exactly. Again, perfect. Yeah, it's just it's sometimes it's just that easy where it's I'm a neophyte to this song again.
Yeah, to your own stuff.
Yeah, even though I've been playing it for 3 years or whatever.
So that was on an EP prior to Neophyte.
Yeah.
And then we have this, and then we're going to have the third EP.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you brought up like the religious background, because I think in all 3 of these songs on Neophyte, there are like there's phrases that seem to be from that lexicon. Like if we look at, there's a lot of phrases that are from that context. Speak in tongues, just do it softly, is how Station Keys interestingly ends. Because it's, you were saying you couldn't make soft music.
Right.
Why speak in tongues, just do it softly?
I've always had a fascination with different religions and how people go about practice or exercising their beliefs. So I know there's always that imagery in there, and then there's sometimes I just don't know how to say it any better than Catching Hell or whatever it is. Or there's one that is, if I could change, or something like I could change you if there was more tact in the heavens. Like
why tact?
Just because I think sometimes I don't have enough.
So there's some self-critique there.
Yeah, there's some self-critique there.
I could maybe, if you were more like lovingly addressing a person, then the issue that you see that perhaps it would be good to change might change.
Right.
But so that's interesting that there's even a kind of critique of your critique.
Yeah. Yeah.
A self-critique of
Yeah.
your critiquing, of
Somebody
your
else,
tactless
yeah.
critique.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And also reused idioms turning heads.
Mm.
So I'm noticing a lot of phrases from a religious context, an awareness of how certain, one can imagine a person recycling, which is the consummation of recycled things. One could imagine phrases being recycled with an unawareness of the discrepancy between what the phrase means and like the rest of this person's life, perhaps. Yeah. And yet we are kind of recycling these idioms and phrases. What is the attraction to them, do you think? What's the significance of this kind of lexicon? Why is it showing up?
Because I try as hard as I can. Again, like a weird fascination with cliches and malapropes and language and all those kind of things, and how sometimes we use those things as a shield. Not really. It is what it is. Oh, it's not. It isn't. Is what it is. It's stuff like that.
Just a phrase like end of conversation.
Yeah, it just stops any meaningful thing from getting through it.
Right, and sometimes we're not in control of. We're not as in control of words and meaning as we think that we are.
Right.
It's a lethargy and a complicity, a complacency, like these, which are phrases that show up in Read the Sign.
Yep.
One of the moments that struck me, there's some really stuff lyrically going on in poles, and the poles refer to the poles of a battery. Corroded poles of your battery couldn't run your engine clean. Could you expand a bit on that imagery and how the song ended up, how that ended up becoming the title of the song?
The movie Do the Right Thing just hit 30 years. And I was thinking about that when I was typing that to you last night, is the corroded poles being love and hate, or the poles of...
In the movie, the corroded poles are love and hate.
There's a scene with Radio Raheem where he's got love on his left, or hate on left, and he's doing this monologue about love versus hate. And if somebody is the poles of a person is love and hate.
As in, we oscillate between
these
poles?
Well, we use them to navigate our lives. Or some of our lives, and I think when both of those poles are corroded and they're not firing correctly, then I just think that makes a person kind of compromised.
Interesting. So if they're not, so does this relate to, again, the person that doesn't want to come across as a neophyte, the person that wants to seem like they are in control, they know this kind of situation, a lack of receptivity, a lack of being willing to, but being responsive to...
I mean, you can even, I feel like sometimes the poles like that are corroded by things like cynicism. Are corroded by sarcasm. Which I love, but it's trying to investigate how people's minds work and things like that. And there are people here, there are people in Denver that would just, if you were new, just did not want to. You weren't welcome.
They didn't want to engage with this new.
This person would be kind of alienated off to the side. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the country right now that is very similar to
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah, I'm not, and not just this country, but I'm British,
Right.
obviously.
Yeah, right.
There's an analogous, very scary lack of tolerance.
Yeah.
I think another thing that could be seen as the opposite of love is fear. So a fear of the other.
Yeah.
I think the loving pull, we can imagine if that one were not corroded, then maybe there'd be more tact.
Yeah,
There would be.
there would.
There would
Yeah.
be. So we can imagine what it would have, some good things that would happen. But we would just basically be more loving and accepting of one another
Yeah.
if that pull was not corroded.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So, but the hatred pull. Like, what are the virtues of having a non-corroded hatred pull?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think from that comes just apathy. I feel like if you really, like, again, without getting on my soapbox, there's a lot of things happening in the country right now, in our country, and I won't speak for yours, but yeah, we've seen it, and just that people are not, they're just not willing to get mad about things. It seems like things can happen and people just go, well, that's just the way it is now, and this is how we're going to, and so.
So there could be, as opposed to that, a warranted anger,
Yeah.
which arises as a result of an accurately sensed injustice.
Yeah.
And and it's not fitting in every context.
Right.
To just be, to be loving, everything is great.
Yeah.
If there's injustices occurring,
Yeah.
then anger and these less positive emotions, if one was to label them in that way, then have a place. And it makes sense that actually, going back to why does the music sound like this if it's dealing with these issues?
Yeah.
It makes sense then that we would have this kind of driving, fast music that is part of its call for integrity is a call to actually be angry.
Yeah.
It's about certain things.
Yeah. And we take our moments to have some quiet time.
Yeah.
Everybody calm down.
Yeah, be loving too.
Be loving too. I think it's all about trying to strike a balance in your life and just in my life and in your values, and like I said, and be consistent in those things.
Yeah.